So my name is Robby Stahl. I'm a product management engineer with F5. I work specifically on private cloud, like virtual edition and that sort of stuff. But my background is actually pretty varied. I used to do customer-facing performance testing with hardware and Ixia. And I've also been on a competitive analysis team, which means I've seen a lot of deployments, a lot of interesting things, right? So with that said, here's what I want to talk about today. And these points, pretty simple. Eye health. You'd be surprised, possibly, at the number of people who don't really know anything about eye health. So I want to quickly walk through that and kind of answer any questions you might have about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about configuration migration options. And so kind of conceptually, what are the different options that you have? Excuse me, that you have. And I'll actually show you a couple examples. But the core of the content is actually what I find interesting. And so I'm going to show you methods that you can get data out of a big IP without using the web interface, right? The idea that I want people to embrace is that eventually you can administer many big IPs without ever having to physically touch or even virtually interact with a device directly, right? And once you get to where everything's completely automated, then it frees you to do more useful work. So let's begin. Eye health, if you've never been there, eyehealth.f5.com. It is disturbingly simple to use. You literally just create a QK view on the machine, and then you can either upload it directly from the machine, or you can drag it locally if your machine doesn't have outbound internet access and upload it. There's no harm in proactive uploads, and what I mean by that is the first step in any support case is basically, okay, we verified that you're an existing customer with a valid license. Can you send us a QK view to iHealth, right? But you can submit those at any time. You don't have to have a support case to submit them. And I think you'll find there's real value in looking at all the information that's available. You get lots of feedback about, like maybe you've missed a version notification, any known CVEs. Sometimes we point out, like literally, like if you didn't change the password, it'll actually say that you're still using weak credentials. And it's not machine learning, but it's machine analysis, right? And by doing so, a computer is much more thorough than you tend to be because you're rather inconsistent, right? So yeah, let's look at that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go quickly through the interface. Maybe you'll see some new stuff, maybe you won't. But I like to raise awareness about the tool because it's actually pretty remarkable. Before I get going, you have a question?
Yeah, would you mind turning your mic on if you have it?
The microphone is on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's see here. Do I have gain control? Do I have a sound guy in the room? I do not. Could you open the door and ask the facilitator to get us somebody to change the levels, please? That is unfortunate. Thank you. Well, you say that, but it becomes very tiring after an hour to speak louder. So okay. So thank you. I guess for the next 5 minutes, I'll try to speak more loudly. I have one of those voices that doesn't carry. So in the general sense, we're going to go quickly through the iHealth interface. And yeah, I hope you have some questions along the way. Quick show of hands. Who here has actually used iHealth? Okay. That's actually very impressive. I won't spend a lot of time on this then because you've all seen it. But out of all the people who raise hands, how many of you have sent a QK view just because? That is not what I expected. Thank you. So where did I park that window? Here we go. So in the general sense, here are some QK views that I've uploaded, right? So this is actually fresh from yesterday, I believe. I have a long-running harness at my desk. And you can see, even though this was the latest RTW version, so 13.108 point release 8, we actually have some bugs, right? Or not bugs, but misconfigurations or issues. And well, this is actually a misconfiguration, right? So this is just running in a harness at my desk. I don't really care to keep it secure. And you can see that I have a weak password, right? That's as expected. But let's look at things a little bit here. So there's no support case attached to it. But you can actually see some very quick information, like how many virtuals, nodes, iRules. How many of you, show of hands, have ever worked through the Configuration Explorer? Okay, so smaller majority, so we'll look at this real quick. So you can get configurations out of iHealth in many ways. Like you can actually grab the configuration file directly, or you can actually look at the configurations in iHealth, or if you're kind of more of a visual person, you can actually start walking through your configuration. So I could say LTM, virtual server. I can actually look at a virtual server here, right? So common APA1 HTTPS, right? And so I can actually look at the configuration for a device, again, without actually logging into the big IP itself. That's the value here, right? iHealth gives you an interesting place to park all of your data for better analysis, so that there's no really way to spin that. I mean, you either do it or you don't, right? So if we look, how many of you actually use the generated graphs to get performance analysis of your information, right? Okay, much smaller majority. So for those of you that don't, I want to show you why this is quite useful. So again, this is all data from a QK view. And so I can actually look at, let's look here. So throughput, client side. And let's look at some CPU information as well, and maybe memory, right? And just like that, this is actually graphed performance data from my device. Yep. Sound guy? Yes, so apparently my microphone is a little low for the people in the back. How about now? No? How about now? Are you possibly not under a speaker? So, how about now? No. Yeah. How about now? Sound check?
Sounds the same.
Yeah. Swapping mics?
Yeah, let's just switch it out.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. Technology. That's not my specialization, if we're honest here. All right. Sounds like it might be a little, how's that? I'm not yelling at anybody? Wonderful. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Conrad.
Yeah. You want a Starbucks card? So yeah, so this is information from a big IP that I have running at my desk, and it's been running for about a month, right? But what's cool is I can actually look at this data, and I can just kind of go browsing through it. And if you have multiple devices in your network that are periodically sending data to iHealth, there's a lot of background analysis you can do, right? But what's also pretty useful about this sort of thing, and I don't have an example ready to show you, but essentially when somebody's like in a carrier service provider network and you ask them, what does your traffic look like? And they say, oh, it's iMix. That's stupid. Nobody has actual iMix traffic, right? What you can do is look at this and say, okay, this is how many throughput, this is my throughput quantized in packets versus bits. And from that, I can actually figure out what my average packet size is in my network. And it's going to be different from device to device within the same network, right? Very important for capacity planning. Any questions about that? All right. So, again, the diagnostics, we already looked at that a little bit. There's nothing else really impressive is the right word, but nothing earth-shattering here since you're all iHealth users, right? So, moving on.
I have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned that the device can upload the PKView file directly to iHealth?
It can.
Okay, I didn't know.
Yeah. So,
I didn't manually.
so let's, oh, wrong direction. Is that large enough for everybody in the back? No, it's not going to be. All right, that's a pretty impressive font size. So you have a few options here. Like if you actually just issue the QKView command, oh, it doesn't show. All right, let's look at my notes here. Yes, I understand. I didn't want to. So, yes, I'm on that. So yes, there's a QKView command you can run directly, and that'll generate the file. But there actually is a TMSH command that you can use to, in one single step, generate a QKView, and then upload it to iHealth directly, like you provide some credentials. Unfortunately, I don't remember what that is off the top of my head, but we'll visit at the end of the presentation. So, but yeah, like if I ran QKView right now, well, I guess we can just do it. We got time. It's literally going to generate a QKView, and then it's going to park the file in the box, and I can grab it and then send it, all without using the web interface. Right?
So they have to come up by switch.
It is I guess basically yes. I don't know if we can actually orchestrate that through Ansible or anything else yet. So, however, we touch upon this further into the talk here. So yeah, so generate a QKView without using the web interface. Just did that. So let's talk a bit shifting into configuration migration options. Everybody has existing infrastructure, and then like you need a larger platform, and you're just switching to virtualization or whatever, right? But whenever we build something, in the general sense, we tend to just configure it by hand and get it working, and then we solve the ticket and we move on, right? That is not ideal. So let's talk about what you have to do when it's time to actually migrate to a different device, right? So there's the manual reproduction process. So you literally have one device open in a window, and you're walking through it and importing the configuration over. It's time consuming, and you're probably going to make a mistake, right? You want to avoid that. Something that I used to do a lot in performance testing was we would be provided a customer configuration or a sales team configuration, and they would provide us a bigip.conf, right? But I don't need the entire configuration. I just need certain portions for the virtual servers and the profiles and the pools, right? So I would actually dice up the configuration file and then load those as fragments into a running configuration and then commit that change. And that's done using the load sysconfig merge file, right? And you usually want to throw the verify switch in there because it'll actually verify that what you have entered is sane rather than just crashing. Another option is loading a UCS or a single configuration file from one device into another. Show of hands, who in this room has ever loaded a UCS and had it just work the absolute first time? Right. Right. Well, now you can do that. We have an option. So platform migrate. Yep. Very new, yes. So, a better option to loading a UCS is actually changing your environment such that you now have a cluster environment, right? So using floating IPs and traffic groups. And the reason for that is because then your configuration migration becomes establishing trust with the new device, syncing its configuration to it, and then remove the old device. That's a zero downtime cutover if you do it correctly, right? So, but the absolute best, and something we should all be planning for, is that when you configure a device, you actually push the configuration to it from some sort of centralized repository, something that's change managed and you actually know programmatically, and you have not paperwork, but a change history of why these changes were made and why this configuration looks this way, and you push it into your environment, right? Because then the individual instances don't really matter. If it dies once, you essentially restart it, push a new configuration to it. If it dies twice, you preserve it and pull it out so you can do some more troubleshooting, but then you put another one in its place, right? And, but the idea behind all of this is that a good sysadmin is lazy, and I don't mean that they do no work, but I mean that they avoid going into the data center. They avoid doing things by hand when they could actually automate it and then make it a simple bash script later on, right? And that's what you should be reaching for in all of these things, is that long term, you should not have to touch a big IP directly unless you're doing a root cause analysis and it's no longer passing traffic. So what I want everybody in this room to do and take away from this is just consider other methods besides logging into a device directly, because we're exposing more methods over time. Are there, I guess there wouldn't be, but any questions or like opinions about this? Sure.
What are your thoughts on using that clustering approach when you're doing like major version upgrades, right? Like if I'm going from 12 to 13 or something, is it still safe to be able to do that config sync without any issues?
Right. So the question, the question was, when you're doing a configuration, or if you attempt to do a configuration sync between disparate versions or disparate major versions, like is it encouraged and basically does it work reliably? The short answer is that we know internally, and I believe it's documented in support.f5.com, like which versions you can do that with, like which ones will actually config sync properly. Doesn't always work as you would expect. Like sometimes certain objects won't be imported because we've made massive schema changes within the product version to version. But we do document those. And we actually have a pretty serious, I guess you call it harness internally, where we're actually trying to port configurations between different versions and running the full matrix and looking for features that break so that we can fix that going forward. So that has been a pain point for us in the past, and we're trying to make it not painful. You have a question?
Yeah, so if that's the case, is it recommended that when you go to a clustering model, you upgrade your current, like, for me, I'm running pairs.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we just got I-5600s. So should I upgrade those pairs to something that the 5600s can run and then cluster after that?
Possibly. So the question was, if I have an existing pair with an old code version and I'm changing to the platform I listed was i5600, should I upgrade to the minimum software version for the i5600 before I do so? And I would say it genuinely depends on what your existing software version is, because the matrix should be available, so you can see, like, will this version sync with this version?
You could technically break your existing application that you upgraded in place from one release to a major next version. Happened to me, where I went from like 11 or maybe like 11 to 12 in place, and there are parts of config that are deprecated in 12 that 11 references, and that broke the application.
Yeah, I guess that would be kind of my concern. There would be two separate instances. Like you schedule a downtime to do the upgrade of your current pair, see whatever the hell it is that you break, fix it, and then do the cluster.
So in an ideal world, no, you would not have to do that. But I agree with you. It depends on what that step in versions is, right? It's also possible, usually possible, that like even if you can't make the major version jump, you can jump between minor versions to get close enough that you can then make the major version jump. You see what I mean? So you could have an active pair, and you can do point release upgrades on one, fail it over, point release updates on one, until it's within the major version jump where the configuration will actually port cleanly to the rest of the cluster. So, but yeah, that's the point I'm trying to make. Like, consider lots of options, right? So, cool. So, what was I going to say? Platform migrate. If you want to just do like an in-place replacement, right? Then from disparate platforms, you want to use the platform migrate option. So you'll still have to do some base configuration yourself, like you actually have to map your interfaces to VLANs and that sort of thing. But as far as like just moving the traffic configuration without problem, platform migrate. So you have a question.
Going back to the clustering approach, can I have mismatched hardware versions in a cluster?
You can,
Okay,
yes.
so I mean, if I'm going like 9 to 10,
Yep.
I could do that with the clustering option. I just need to be aware of code version issues protection.
Right. So the question was, can you have mismatched hardware but still do synchronization? And yes, you can for config sync. And for most configurations, you can actually get away with it with sync failover as well. Ideally, you don't want to like pair a virtual edition with a Viprion, because if you happen to fail over during the middle of that, the virtual edition's not going to be able to process the traffic, right? Interesting things happen. But in the general sense, we've actually sorted that out pretty well. It's not officially sanctioned, but I can verify it does work. So, cool. So, what I'd like to show now is actually how to use the platform migrate option. It's pretty unimpressive, but it's cool that it works. So, here we have an existing big IP. So I have a couple virtual servers configured on it. And for those of you who prefer the graphical interface, we can take a look here real quick. Yes, but you have no physical access to my box.
Are you sure?
Yes. Yeah. In terms of layer 1, I'm at the computer, and you are not. So we can actually look at the existing configuration, right? So virtual servers, like I said, I have 2 virtual servers running. Basically labeled application 01. I have an HTTP and HTTPS listener. This is pretty simple. Basically, I just have a client SSO profile and a pool with a single member behind it. This is just basic SSL termination, right? And so what that looks like is this description here. So I have destination, IP, that sort of thing. So what we need to do is we need to save a copy of this configuration. So save sysconfig, save sysucs. Now I'm going to drag that locally, and then I'm going to push it to another big IP that currently has no configuration. So for those of you playing the home game, this is big IP VE01. This is big IP VE02. Has no traffic configuration, has no network configuration, and we can verify here. So this is the graphical view of the same machine. All right. So, generated UCS. Let's drag it locally. I'll use this one. Cool. Then, so what I've done is I just used SCP, or shell copy essentially, to drag a copy to my local machine, and now I'm going to push it to the other big IP. So. Okay, so now if we go here, I have two options, right? I have the UCS from big IP VE01, and I have the one for this device that I can reset back to. So let's do that. This is going to be load sys UCS big IP VE01. We want to use platform migrate, and I don't want to clobber my existing license, so we're going to say no license. And we don't have to worry about no platform check anymore because we're actively ignoring all platforms by saying platform migrate.
Does that take care of the master key too?
What was the question?
I don't think it does it? I think you have to set the master.
Yeah, I know. So the question was, does that take care of the master key too?
Or do you still have to rekey before you, because everything's encrypted on the platform, right? Of the UCS though?
I honestly don't know the answer to that.
It doesn't care about the master key right now.
So, well, there would be no existing device trust, but what his question is, will it generate new master keys or import the master keys from the UCS? I don't actually know.
They're not included in the UCS.
Yeah, they're not.
Okay.
The UCS logo fail usually if the master key.
I mean, with my experience,
Usually
at least
with the RMA.
version 12, I had to set the master key on the new box, on the destination box, to match the source, or else all my SSL certs, like the private keys and things, would break, basically, anything that was encrypted.
I guess the option to encrypt the UCS file will work because then the passwords within the UCS are not encrypted with the master key.
So if you're
I did that in the
encrypting,
past.
So,
if you're setting the option to encrypt when you create the UCS.
Yes. Then you have to specify a password during saving.
Not the encryption of the UCS, but the master key that's used to encrypt all the services. So
like passwords and private keys and everything are encrypted based off the master key on
Right.
Drive 5.
So my experience has been the same.
Platform
Right.
specific.
I can
Yeah.
copy the key out of the other one, rekey the new host, and then load
Right.
the UCS.
Or change it on both to a common key,
Right.
yeah. So it's not often they get it stumped. I don't actually know the answer to that.
And it would usually
Yeah.
have failed on the load, so
Right,
obviously it's working.
Where did the migration most likely fail?
right. So yeah, that was a good question though. Come up at the end because I never get stumped, and you may have a Starbucks card. So the question was, for the sake of the recording or the people in the audience that didn't hear it, when using platform migrate, what happens with the master key, right? And through the course of the discussion, we kind of sussed out that because it works, it probably just works. That's the least precise I can be with that.
Did you have password encrypted
This-
stuff in your config in
Yeah.
the UCS file?
This was not an encrypted UCS.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have a monitor where the password is stored or something where you have the stuff which gets encrypted with the master key, only then it will fail. So if you have a plain setup where just a virtual server on the pool it sits there, there's nothing encrypted.
Okay, but So to your point, we haven't actually tested that, so I don't have an answer, right? So
Can you dump out the master key compared to, just to say they match or not?
so sure. How do I do that?
F5MKU-K?
F5MKU-K, capital K.
Oh, dash capital K. All right, I learned something today.
Yeah, so that's your master key.
Cool. So let's see if it's the same one as this one. Nope, this is different. Yeah, learned something. So, but yeah. So also, I don't know if anybody caught it, but we actually migrated to a totally different version, right? So the source big IP was running 12.131. Destination big IP was running 13.108. All right, so and there's my configuration. I think it's kind of awesome, having done it the hard way many times. So, are there any questions
Is
aside?
this a new feature, platform migrate?
It's reasonably recent. When did that come out, Henry?
It's like 12 dot something, I don't know exactly. But
Okay.
it's about a year old now, I think.
Okay. So yeah,
It's not that recent.
yes.
Yeah, is it different from, because in older versions, I think there was an option to do a no platform check or something?
Yeah,
Is
it
the
is.
same thing renamed?
Or
or is it-
No, I would assert that it's different from the no platform check, because no platform check just kind of tries to force everything in, whereas platform migrate attempts to do the right thing, right?
When you platform migrate, you have to recreate all the interfaces in VLAN settings right before, right?
No.
Interface
So that's where configurations sync. Here, we had, excuse me, wrong device. We had no VLAN configuration. And now we do. So we scroll back up. Where is this?
How is it possible? I used a setup from a virtual vision. I had put it on a device which has far more interfaces. How is the message done? Which interface on my previous box is now on the other box? Is it random generated?
No, it wouldn't be random. I haven't tested that. I assume I assume if it has an absence of information, it will just stop the process until you need more information. That's a fair question. So the question was, what will happen if you have disparate interfaces or essentially disparate hardware, right? I assume that it would. So in the general sense, our software asks for information when it is ambiguous, right? So if the interface mapping was not one-to-one, then I believe we would fail and wait for you to correct that.
So that demo you just did, was the two platforms identical?
I guess they technically are identical. So they're different virtual machine versions by far, but the hardware mapping, yeah, I guess that's fair. It's 2 CPUs, 4 gigs of RAM, and 4 interfaces. So
And the IP configuration, is it still the same on both boxes?
it is the same on both boxes. We just did a platform migrate. So in fact, yeah, I'm currently
So in order
IP conflict.
Platform migration, I mean, both boxes should be identical. If you have a 10,000 of it, 900, you can run that because the interface like this.
I guess there's only
Yeah.
one way to find out.
Yes, I mean, definitely go test it. And quite frankly, if we do the wrong thing, file a bug and let us know, right? Or file a support case.
If you're about to leave your job anyway,
So, all right, they're like,
you love your job.
your question.
So in this scenario, are you sharing with your network or whatever a different IP address so that you can SCP between them, and then when you bring it back up, then it assumes the original IP?
So I see what you're asking. So no, I've originally configured 2 different management addresses. So they're 2 logically different machines. All I've imported is the traffic level configuration, right? But you do raise an interesting point. We have time to test this. Let's do it. So if I actually have a VLAN in place, maybe we won't actually load that. What is your question?
I just pulled up the KB article on F5 about platform migrate. It says you don't migrate VLAN members. You migrate VLANs, but you don't migrate members. You don't migrate interfaces.
Interfaces.
That makes sense. So I guess if it was completely disparate, then we'd have unmapped interfaces and you map them into the VLAN, which is a simple step to take. So, but again, we do the correct thing of not assuming in ambiguous information, right? So.
been my experience, at least in a lot of the sites with migrations, that the management IP doesn't get overridden. I think there might be an option to override it. The default UCS load typically does not
Right.
override my local management. I don't know if the behaviors change in the fall from retired.
I've seen the same behavior like version 11 onward. It just doesn't touch your management IP.
Which is
Right.
good and which is bad.
Usually that's how you're in the box. So you don't
Cool.
want it to work anything up.
All right. So maintaining flow here, I'm actually going to load back to my base configuration because then I'm going to do it completely programmatically. There's my base. Oh, actually, it did change base configuration. So we're currently in big IP 02, but my host name has changed to big IP VE01. Anybody see that? Yeah, so. So that'll take a couple moments. So while that's going, let's prepare you for what's coming. So now what I'm going to show is actually a simple scripted traffic configuration. So without logging into the big IP directly, I'm actually going to use Ansible, so an Ansible playbook to actually set up my networking, my VLANs, and actually set up another application all in one single shot. So what that looks like is here. So in this repo on GitHub, I will actually be updating with additional information after the session. But you can look at it now if you'd like. So here's a simple playbook. So we're actually going to configure big IP VE02. And so the tasks are named for precisely what they're going to do. So I'm going to add my backplane VLAN, my external VLAN, my internal VLAN. I'm going to set the self IP for backplane, external, internal. I'm going to declare a pool. I'm going to add a member to that pool. I'm going to create my virtual server. And then it's all done. This will happen very quickly. So we back up? Yes, we are. So I'll move into my playbooks folder or directory. Who here uses Ansible in their environment? Okay. While I'm in question mode, who here uses OpenStack in their environment? Okay. Disparate sets. I find that interesting. All right. So Ansible playbook, configure big IP. All right. So a couple warnings go by because I didn't do this in the most efficient fashion. But so now we actually see we're going through each of the tasks. So I'm adding my VLAN, add VLAN, adding self IPs. All right, that's done. So here are my self IPs. And you'll notice, if you care, these are different from the self IPs on big IP VE01, right? And we have a different listener. So the last octet is 101. Or if you want to see it in the web interface, here are my virtual servers. Whereas on this device, here's a virtual server with a different listener, and I created the whole thing programmatically. I never once touched big IP directly. Please do that. You will be much happier. Any questions about how that works?
Do you have a tool to go the other way around?
So the question is, do I have a tool to go the other way around? Do you mean like? I don't think there is a tool for that. It's, yeah, so the question is creating, if I understand correctly, it's taking an existing configuration and you feed it through a tool that's going to just generate Ansible playbook or equivalent calls to programmatically place that on another big IP. I don't think there's an automagical way to do that, but it's also not entirely a hard problem set, right? So if we look at an Ansible playbook, oh, I've misplaced my window.
There is a tool internally, I don't know if it's internal.
Was that the migration assistant?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's internally going away, as it was explained to me by Mr. Tam, actually. So let's look at this, right? So here we have the playbook that I use to deploy everything, but I've currently statically coded everything. In Ansible and another orchestration framework, they are massively impressed with templating, right? So in Ansible, what they use is a templating language called Jinja 2. So you can take these fields and you can actually replace them with variables that come from somewhere else. And that's not really a cool trick in itself. But with Ansible, they have the concept of what's called a dynamic inventory. So that means that every time you run Ansible, it can make a call out to whatever the actual source of truth is and get the information that it should be deploying, right? So you start to see how this logically fits together. Like when people start deploying automation, they tend to make the automation tool the source of truth, but that's not where the real information comes from. The automation tool is simply getting information from externally and applying it to your environment as you dictate that it should, right? So you can imagine that instead of having statically defined, this is where it's going and this is the interface and this is the VLAN, you could actually have Ansible query the big IP, say what interfaces do you have, right? Then you could have Ansible look to VMware and say, for these interfaces that are enumerated, which network segments are those actually on? Then Ansible could say, okay, external inventory, what application should I be deploying here? And then it'll do the interface mapping, right? So there's no magic way to do it, but for people who work in the DevOps world, it's not hard, just time consuming for the first run, and then you have a reusable tool thereafter. Did I answer the question? Maybe, okay. You have a question.
One of the advantages you talked about was using a clustering approach versus the UCS approach. You do it online because you add to the cluster, you do a stateful failover, there's no downtime, et cetera.
Right.
It feels like going this approach, we're back to needing downtime because I'm deploying a new box or a new set of boxes with the same config, but there's no F5 level failover capability there.
Okay.
So
yeah, so I guess the observation is that it feels like using this, you're actually not getting the zero downtime benefits of a clustered failover or a clustered migration. However, you can use automation to establish the device trust and the clustering and then do it all automatically, right? The idea is that your clusters would actually get configurations pushed to them externally.
So I wouldn't be pushing, I'd be pushing that level of detail, but stuff is off the screen and not LTM config and all that.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, so when you define your self IPs, after these you would define your floating self IPs, then you would define the traffic group, right, and so forth. The whole idea is that if you start thinking about automation first, then your day-to-day life of living with our devices or anybody's device actually becomes much easier because you solve a particular problem once, you build it as a template that you can reuse essentially forever, but really about 3 years until you change orchestration frameworks because somebody in the C-level set his time, right? So, I don't think there are any questions there. So let's move on. So I talked a little bit about this, but this is where I feel like some of the fun stuff is. So in the network operations world, like somebody's application is misbehaving, or at least the client traffic to the application is misbehaving, and everybody wants to blame the network infrastructure, right? But you can actually impose instrumentation in the traffic plane without ever having to physically visit or interact with the device, and you can get information very quickly. And then you can say, I believe the industry term tends to be least time to innocence or something like that. So, but let's think about what you can do, right? So big IP, so you have TMOS, which is the traffic management microkernel and all this other services that run with it, but that all runs on top of like a full CentOS box, logically, right? So start thinking, like, what could I do if I just treat this like a Linux box? What can I wrap in a single line of SSH, right? So if you need a remote packet capture, you can literally, just as a one line, take a 500 packet capture and have it timestamped and then pull it off the device. Think about that sort of thing, right? Or what can you learn from your orchestration tools? Basically, Ansible has what it calls gather facts, so it can actually interrogate a device and say, okay, this is its current state. And then you can compare, so versus the state that I pushed to it, maybe somebody made a change I wasn't aware of, right? What can you extract via our APIs, specifically the iControl REST API? I'll show an example of that. And essentially, you can get live configuration data and live statistical analysis of the state of the machine. Or if you actually want to instrument the traffic while it's running through, you can actually apply iRules to look for very specific events and give you more very small or very detailed information, right? And so the example I'm actually going to show is finding the the per stream average packet size. And the reason that distinction is important is that if you look at the statistics for virtual, you can calculate the aggregate average packet size for that application, right? But if you know that a certain client is experiencing weird issues, you can actually start grepping for their IP and say it looks like they have a misconfigured MSS or however the root cause ends up being, right? So, and then also we have many methods to export information from Big IP. Big IQ, obviously we want you to use that. But if you choose not to use BigIQ, we have a long-standing partnership and integration with Splunk. Or if you just treat it like a regular Linux box, like you pull data through SNMP or however, custom cacti implementation. The idea is that everybody's environment is different, and I want people to think more about how they can integrate us into their environment, right? And then you also start considering, so what if I just had BigIP start exporting data to me in bulk, right? So you can actually use an iRule that actually dumps data. You can send data to infrastructure services. I mean, just think about it. We generate so much data internally, and there's so many ways to get it out. If you think about it, it probably works. So let's start. So this harness has a few moving pieces. Going back to trusty BigIP 01 here. So I have these two virtual servers, and I have a running syslog endpoint. So every 10 seconds is going to show us the messages that are in its buffer. So, and I have a single server, a single web server, and I have a single client that's currently running a utility. Excuse me, it's just running curl. So it's making 2 requests and it sleeps a second, right? If you want to see what that looks like real quick. Very simple. So until the end of the universe, grab something from this virtual server, grab something from this virtual server, use configure it, use encryption, and then sleep 1 second. So now, let's look first at the REST API. I'll show you the code. Here we go. So if you are a Python developer, you might catch this. If not, it's worth noting that you can actually get all this data directly from the REST API without involving the F5 SDK, right? The REST API that we expose allows us to be integrated in basically anybody's service as long as they're willing to spend a little time writing a shim. And so here I quickly define some constants, basically who are we talking to and what do we want. I have a couple of manipulators to basically take the chunk of REST data and format it the way I want it to. And so we're actually going to gather some statistics and print them out. And then here's the simple route, right? Again, all of this code is available on the GitHub repository that I'll mention at the end of the presentation. So, there we go. You ever been in the middle of a presentation and forget the screen bindings? Yeah. So what you can see here, so per virtual server, we actually get the full URL. Now the host name is not referenced properly, that's my bad. But we can actually see what the virtual server that we're getting data from is. And so is the state up? Yeah, it's enabled. Why? Well, it's available. Cool. So then we can see bits in, packets out. And here we have average packet size. Current concurrent connections is 0 because every request gets satisfied before the next one comes in. We're only requesting once every second, right? And the same information for the HTTPS virtual. So again, this isn't an exhaustive example, but I want you to think about data that you can get from the REST API, right? The REST API is fully documented both on the box as well as on Dev Central, and I urge you to look through it. So next, let's actually start instrumenting traffic live, right? So I'm going to ramp things up a bit here. We're not going to sleep anymore. Let's run as fast as it can. Okay. So now, if I look here at my syslog catcher, we should start seeing a lot of information eventually, because we haven't applied any iRules. So let's do it through the graphical interface first. So virtual servers, virtual server list, I'm going to apply them to this one. Resources, yeah. So what I want to do is I want to track HTTP response time. Let's actually see what ciphers are in use and per connection TCP stats, right? Yeah, finished. So I'll show you the result, and then I'll show you what's in the iRules themselves, because they're really quite simple. So here I have my syslog listener. Oops, excuse me. Here I have my syslog listener. And see, we're actually getting information, right? So this client, they all have the same IP address because they're coming from the same machine, but we can actually see negotiated TLS version 1.2 and the exact cipher. why this is actually important for those of you who've been in this environment with F5 is if you look at our existing client SSL, or excuse me, SSL profile stats in the general sense, we don't actually say which exact cipher was used, right? We say these are statistics for this key family and blah, 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 blah. But if you want to know per connection, you either need to use AVR, or you can actually just throw on a quick iRule and get the information, right? So what am I doing here? Here we are. There's my entire SSL instrumentation. Just one line inside of an event. And I now know what every client has used for their cipher. So then if you capture that off box somewhere else and do the analysis, you have the data, right? Great for compliance. HTTP response time, again, just a few lines trapping for request. I set a clock. When the response comes back, I now know how long it took by finding the delta, right? Just be thinking about all these different ways you can get information out of the box. Any questions about that or how it works? You have a question.
I perceive that you're using high-speed logging, which goes to another box.
Yes.
And you probably want to be a little careful about local logging, which may produce a lot of disk I/O on the local system.
Yeah, that's a very good observation. I did it implicitly, but the man is explicitly right. So his point was that when you're doing logging, especially per connection and per transaction, this sort of thing, your log volume is going to be very high, right? Unless you're selecting for a smaller criteria. And so in this example, I actually am using the high-speed logging functionality, which means that we're actually making connections within the iRule out to just a dumb UDP endpoint. So in this case, I actually wrote my own UDP logger because why not? But his point is that you shouldn't be using local logging for high volume traffic. And I would actually assert that you should not be using local logging, period. So if you're deploying this at scale, or even in an environment where you expect to be audited at some point, logs that exist in only one place don't actually exist, right? So you should be exporting all logs to somewhere else. Thank you. Okay. So just kind of to frame this whole thing, very brief history of computer automation. So we started by actually like literally wiring things up with the devices we used to crack, basic encryption in the 40s and that sort of thing. And then we used punch tape and punch card. And then we started putting those in batches and feeding them to the machine so the operator had more time, didn't have to stand there and watch the job, right? Then eventually we had terminals and teletypes who said, okay, so multiple users can touch the device at once and everybody can be doing things simultaneously. Again, the idea is that the operator spends more time actually optimizing the situation and not running dumb jobs, right? And now we're at the point where we have automation frameworks. The idea is that machines do the work and we get to play and think about abstract stuff. So as you spend more time automating things, you'll have, as you spend more effort automating things, you will have more time long-term to solve the things that are actually interesting. That's my thesis. And I urge you to look at the repository. I'll be posting a suggested reading list, not to sound pedantic or arrogant, but it's things that I find interesting and relative to this topic, and I think you might as well. And I now open to general questions and answers.
Can you put that URL back?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's I'll read it out. It's github.com/F5rstall, all one token, and then it's conf-agility-2018. Yeah. I also have another repository posted there which you might find interesting. I used it. It's where I store the materials for a Dev Central article that I wrote. And it's about using Ansible to deploy us directly into a VMware environment without having to actually ever log into the big IP directly. Yes?
Playbook for Ansible to update the certification of the F5.
Can you repeat that?
Is there any playbook for automation certification up? You have certification and it expires and you don't balance it. Is there any playbook for that? I haven't seen it.
Right. I don't know if there's a playbook for that. So the question was, is there a playbook or at least a good example for automatic certification and upgrades and that sort of thing? I don't think we have one. That said,
I think AppUX actually supports that. It's not Ansible, but AppUX, you can auto upgrade your service and call after you get more. It's pretty cool. They actually, I'm not a salesperson.
Right.
But, they typically will set up a shop that will actually pull down like the shirt authority and update your shirt profiles like that.
So, yeah. So Ansible is the example I use just because it's the tool that I have handy and I know it somewhat well. But so if you're familiar with Ansible, I urge you to look through the big IP modules that we expose. But in the general sense, again, you don't need to use Ansible. You can use whatever orchestration framework you happen to have. Like even if that's a collection of bash scripts all orchestrated by cron, at some point you've made intelligent decisions about where to get data and what to do with it, right? That's the trick.
You've got options there to import delays and do it against the keys. So.
Yeah. So I guess maybe I misheard. Did you say certificate or certification? Certificate. Okay. Then yes, we have that. I misheard, and that was my fault.
Can you open it?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So content issue shirt. Da, 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 da. Oh, there should be an example down here. There we go. Yeah.
What if it's a PK format that is still involved? PM certificate, right? Or if it's a PK format that is still involved?
It should be able to. So the question was, does it matter whether it's a standalone key and cert or the combined bundle? I believe it'll work for either one. And if not, let us know and we'll fix it. Because the Ansible integration is our problem if there's a problem, right? So, but if you don't tell us that we missed something, we never know. So, yeah?
And how is the process on the Ansible?
So assuming you're an existing F5 customer, open a support ticket with us. So.
It support does okay.
Yeah, so support doesn't do that, right? But support will triage it properly, and it'll go to the person or the team who's responsible for API integrations and so forth. But the best contact when a customer finds something that we messed up or that isn't correct is actually through support, because that whole process is streamlined to rapidly triage things and get you back in business. So, yes?
Hi, of course, things that are on GitHub may not be supported.
There is that, though. Yeah, so the observation was that things that are on GitHub may not be supported. And you are correct. However,
What if it's on F5 networks, Kip?
we're pretty committed to things that are in that list of repositories, right? Like our CloudFormation templates, I believe, get in here, and our actual Ansible integration, right? Like, I guess if you wanted to, you could actually submit, you could submit an issue directly through here. And this guy, Mr. Tim Rupp, he will know personally that happened.
Yeah, for Ansible, I would recommend doing GitHub.
Gotcha. I'll come back to you for your next question. What's yours?
So this may be super basic for people right here, but
Sure.
in our shop, we literally just run containers.
Okay.
So if you're going to cluster, is that just adding another device to the trust group? Or is there way more involved?
Yeah. So the question is, if you run pairs, does clustering just mean adding another device to the group? And so what's interesting is if you're like 11 and later, if you have an existing HA pair, it actually already is using device trust, right? So then, if you add a third device, you've actually increased your aggregate capacity. So what we marketed as scale N is the idea that you can distribute the different traffic groups across your devices and actually use all of your aggregate capacity. Whereas in a standard HA model, you'd have one active and one standby, and you have 50% of your capacity just sitting there forever, right? So, but to answer your question, yes, that should just work, unless you're actually relying on the failover cable, in which case, please switch to network failover. So, you had a question.
Well, I wanted to say, maybe I should have said not everything on GitHub is supported.
That is a fair assertion, yes.
Okay. Now, one other thing, Tim Rupp, I believe, is presenting on the Ansible Smart Morning, is he not?
I believe so, yeah.
Yes, and he's in the first session, I think at 8 o'clock, Tim Rupp, the Ansible guy, will be talking to.
Yeah.
So people who have particular interest in Ansible should do that.
Right. Yes.
Just to understand the session a little bit, do you say, forget about all the migration tools we have released in the past and troubleshooting we have this year, just with Ansible and you have another problem?
That is not my assertion at all. So what I'm saying,
Where's the troubleshooting in the session? So I'm a little bit shocked that it's now an Ansible session.
well, it's not an Ansible session. Well, I guess I did not intend it to be an Ansible session. When I was talking about troubleshooting, and perhaps I was imprecise with the description, I meant traffic plane troubleshooting so that when people implicate your device, you can say it's not actually my problem. Or maybe you just want to know more about device behavior, right? So, and this is where I was trying to explain there are multiple ways to get data out of the device. So, but as far as your migrations, we're not saying just use one option. Like the fact that we now have platform migrate indicates that we realize the deficiencies and not every use case fits for every person. But to solve it properly going forward, you should plan on automation. We will continue to support the other methods because sometimes, people have certified 11x and they're not moving until their support contract ends, right? And we get that. We'll continue to support that. But for new deployments or when you're migrating new applications in the big IP, if you automate it, you will have a better time. Do you have any other questions? Or? Okay. All right. Anything else? Okay. Thanks for your time, everybody. I hope you got something out of it.